Hello guys, in the previous lesson we did a basic setup of Express.js application. In this lesson we are going to learn about routing in Express. So what is routing? Routing is about handling the incoming request to designated URLs and HTTP methods. What that means is this. Let's take for example this setup we have from the previous lesson. We have only one URL we can visit, which we tested on the browser. Let me start the server again and I'll go to localhost 3000. We get the response from the server, which is coming from this code here. This is an example of routing. The syntax has three main components I want to highlight. So it is something like this: app.http request method, and then we have the path, and finally the call back. So in this case, app is just the instance of Express like we have here. The next thing is the HTTP request method. This can be get, post, put, delete, etc. All those HTTP verbs. Let me show you from Postman. From Postman, we can make different kinds of HTTP requests, right? For example, a post request to create something, a get to find stuff, patch or put to update, delete, etc. That is something we are defining here. And then the next one is the path. This is path relative to the base URL. What that means is this. Let me head over to the browser and visit localhost 3000, which is where our application is running. Right now we have only one route and the path is slash, which means the root path. If we have something like /about, it means that over here in the URL we need to visit /about to access, to hit that URL, to hit that endpoint. If we have something like let's say /users /id, we need to visit something like this /user/id, where this replaces the id, and so on and so forth. So let me undo this. So this is the path relative to the base URL, and then we have the callback, this guy here. This is a function where we write the code to handle the request and send out a response. It's just a function, right? So let me come here and say my handler to be equal to this. I can come here and replace this with my handler. It's going to work the same. Let me refresh this page. We get the same result. Let me undo this. The callback function is often called the route handler or the handler function, whichever one you prefer. Now, talking about the different HTTP request method, we have seen a get request example. We can have something like, let me have a post request, post, and let's just send some random stuff here. We don't have any actual implementation. Post, let's say ID to be 1, name to be Jen Doe, to path users. Let's have another one. Let's call this one delete to path users. I'll save that. I'll head over to Postman and try to call those endpoints. This one is to localhost 3000 /users, which is going to correspond to this guy here because it is a post request, and then to the path users relative to the base URL. This is a post request to localhost 3000. Localhost 3000 is the base URL, and then the path is users. If I send off this request, I just get the hard-coded data. We don't really need any payload here. So this is the hard-coded data we have in this route. Similar thing applies to over here. Let me just send one there. I don't know. If I go over to the delete request, and okay, we are getting a 404 because this is not the correct thing we are calling on Postman. Let me modify from the Postman end. I'm just going to send this and we get the response, which is hard-coded value 1. The next thing I want to talk about is route parameters. But what does that mean? Let's say we want to find a user by the ID. So that's going to be a GET request to find a user. This is an example from Postman. We are calling localhost 3000/users and then the ID of the user we want to find. It can be one, it can be whatever the ID is, right? We expect that when we send this request, what will happen here is that the incoming request is going to, for example, search the database, select from users where ID is equal to which ID. So we want to dynamically pass the ID to our code. How we do that is that we come to this part and say /: whatever name we want to give this ID, for example, user ID. We can just call it ID as well, whatever you prefer. The question now is, how do we extract this? How do we get it out? This is the value. This is a placeholder. We want to get the actual value. To do that, we say something like this: const ID to be equal to request.params.id. So this guy params holds all the route parameters as a key, as an object, right? So with this definition and a request like this, we have the ID in the params. Let's try this. I'll come here and say that ID to be that ID and name some fake name, save and send the request. So when I send the request, we get this response. Let's change the ID to something else. You can see that we're able to access the ID from the params. Now what happens is that when we have multiple route parameters, let's say I want something like profile ID. I'll call this one user ID. They are all in the object, these params. Let me do a console.log of request.params. I will save that, and this is now user ID. Let me also grab the user ID, const also request.params. This has user ID and profile ID. So the ID here is now user ID. The bottom line is that we have an object that has all these values in the route parameters. So I'll send off the request one more time. Send the request, we get an error. So the error makes sense. It's a 404 error because we don't have this. We have modified the path, right? So the path is now in this form. Let me just copy it over to Postman and come here and paste that guy. The path is user, then the ID for the user, let's say 3, and then ID for profile, let's say 4. And send the request, we get the same response like before. And of course, this is the output in the console for the user ID and profile ID. So this is how you define, or how you do a placeholder for the URL params, and then this is how you access it from the object request.params. We have seen how to access the route parameters from request.params. Now let's talk about the query string. What does that mean? I guess we already know what query string is. So I'm going to add some examples here. Let's say some A equals B. I don't know. Let me add more. XYZ 1, 2, 3. So we have this query string here. How do we access it in the code? It is straightforward. To access the query string, we use request.query. Let me come here and say const query string values to be equal to request.query. Once again, this is going to give us an object similar to what we get with request.params. I'm going to just come here and return it, put that guy there and save. Let's see what is inside the query string when I run the request. I will send off the request. You can see that we get the key value pair, that is object, when we do something like this, request.query. This is basically how you can access the query string data. Let's talk about the request body. So I'm just gonna come here. Let me actually remove these codes, remove this guy, then over here I just want to return whatever we get. So to access the request body, it is straightforward as well. We say body here. We do that through request.body. That is going to give us whatever we send as the body payload. So let me go to the same endpoint. Yeah, let me just use this one. So this same endpoint, let me change this to a post request. Here I just want to have some random stuff. Let's say name. This is going to be a JSON name, Lucy, and age 22, and I send off the request. So I've changed the HTTP method. I'm also going to change it here. When I send the request, of course we got the body, but we didn't do anything with it. Let me also return the body here so we see what is inside here. I can as well do a console.log of everything. Console.log. I'll send the request one more time. Something happened. Let me check the console. Body is undefined. So the reason the body is undefined is because we need to do one thing here. We need to tell Express to pass the request body. How we do that is simple. We come here and say app.use express.json. This is going to tell Express to pass the incoming request body, so we can easily access it like this. Let me send this one more time. You can see this time we get the request body, and of course you can see that in the console as well. So far we've seen a couple of things we can do with the request object. Let's talk about this guy a little bit more. We have seen that we can use the response object to send a response to the requester, to the client. What happens is that when we don't call the method of this response object, the request is going to get stuck. We're not going to get any response. The server is not going to respond with something. Let's try that and see. I'm going to comment out this guy and save the server restart. I will send this request. You can see we are stuck. We don't get any response. Let me cancel this. So in our route handler, we need to call one of the methods of this res, the response object, to send out a response and to end the request response cycle. Otherwise we get stuck. This guy has a couple of methods inside it that we can call. So res.json is one of them. This is for sending out a JSON response. We have something like res.send for different kinds of data we can send out. We have res.end, etc. So remember to call one of the methods. You can check the official documentations to see the actual difference between the different methods of res. But remember to call it to send out a response and end the cycle. The next thing we are going to look into is express.Router. You've noticed that we have all the codes for routing in this same file, app.js. This is not ideal. Imagine that we have 500 routes. We can't have them all inside this same file. So we are going to clean things up a little bit as well. But before that, let me quickly show you one more thing about routing. So far we've been using something like app.get, app.post, app.delete, etc. We can as well make use of app.route to achieve a similar result. So we say app.route, and then this is the path, and then here we have all the different HTTP method we are expecting for that path. This is equivalent to having something like this. Let me come down here. So this is equivalent to having, we have a post, we say post to /users, then we have another one, get /users. Let's say we come here and have another one like put is equivalent to having this app.put. So this is an alternative way to write the same thing, but this is shorter. We write less codes and things are more organized under the same path, in this case users. I'm going to remove all these guys. I will save this and head over to Postman. Let me just call one of them. This is to post to users. What just happened? So the error, it says that body is not defined. Okay, I don't have any request body here. We can leave it out, but let me just add something like ID to be 3. Send that something else is not defined. Let me go to the code actually. So, oh, this was meant to be request.body, not comma. There was a comma here. So send the request. So we get the response from this guy here. When we do a get request, let's say a get request, that's not even necessary. Get request to users. I'll change this to get, send the request, we get the response. So this is a shorthand to achieve the same thing you can do, writing them one after the other, depending on the use case, by the way. Okay, let's talk about Express.Router. The usage is similar to what we have seen before, but one of the benefits of using it is that we can organize our codes better. For example, let's say we have user and everything that has to do with user, like the endpoint to create user, update, find user, delete, etc. We can have something similar for account, authentication, etc. right? So we can use Express.Router to group all these routes according to the entity where they belong. To use that is really straightforward. What I want to do here is to, let me add a folder for my routes. Let's say routes. Then let's assume for users, we want to have users, yeah, route.ts. You can name it whatever you want. JS, sorry. To make use of the router, we import express const express to be equal to require express, and then we get an instance of the router to be equal to express.router. The R is in capital letter. Down here we can begin to do something similar to what we've done with app. For example, I can say let me have a fake user here, const fake user to be equal to ID to name John Doe. So we can do something like router.post and to this part, and then the callback function, the handler, request response. Let me just send out the response, res.json. Just going to combine this fake user and request.body. So this is similar to what we have before. The HTTP request method, the path, and then the route handler. It's just the same syntax. We can do something similar for other endpoints. For example, endpoint find users by ID. So we say ID. This is going to be a get request to that endpoint. We just return a fake user. Let's also have another one for update. For that, let me copy this. For update, I'm going to use pass to this endpoint that has user ID, and then I also want to have for delete, and for delete I'm just going to return anything there. Instead of returning a JSON, let me say send status code 200. So here I have 4 endpoints: create user, get a user by the ID, update user, and delete user. How do we make use of this router? If I go to Postman and try to, let me restart the server. If I try to call the endpoint to create a user, it's not going to work the way it is now. We don't even have that endpoint defined. To make use of this router, to make it visible, what we need to do is to, first of all, let's module.export to be equal to this. Then we head over to app.js. Let me import the router. So const users router to be equal to require the path to the user's route. To make the routers visible, we need to mount it, right? To mount it is simple. We use the similar syntax we used to mount this express.js. So I'm going to come down here. Let me remove this guy. We say app.use and then a path to mount the routers. For this case, users, and finally the router. So what will happen is every request that goes to the path /users /anything at all is going to be handled by this router. Let me run the example to make it clear. I will send the request again. Something went wrong. Okay, the error is because I'm mixing up the syntax. So I'm supposed to be using the import statement because in the previous lesson we switched to use ES module here instead of the common JS syntax. So instead of all these require, I can just do import that guy from Express, and then over here I can do something similar. Where is it? Yeah, over here I can say import this from this guy. Where did the default come from? I don't know. So I'll save that and let's give this another try. The server is up. Send the request. You can see this time we get the response, and the response is coming from our router over here. Then what happens if I change this mount path to something else, maybe to /? It means that this request is going to break because we don't have anything at the path /users. If I send the request, it is a 404. Because we mounted it into the base URL, to the root path, it still works when we go to the root path. I will change the thing back to users and come over here. So to make use of our router, we say app.use the base path that applies to that router, and then the router. If we go into this router, you will notice that we don't have anything /users in it because we have already defined /users as the mount point for this router. Let me go into the router. This is the create user endpoint. it just says slash. The slash is relative to whatever that is here. In a similar way, we have /:id. It is equivalent to having something like users /:id if it were in the app.js when we are not making use of the router. But because we already have that prefix here, this prefix users, in the router itself, we don't need to put those prefixes again. As you can see here, we can use the router in a similar way we did in app.js. Even the route, when we did app.route, here, we can do something similar, router.route. And then we begin to chain something like post and .get, etc. So it works the same way. Alright guys, to wrap it up, let me show you one more thing. We can have a route that handles all requests. The syntax is like this, app.all, and then we have a path. This means all, the asterisk there, any path. App.all is going to apply, it's going to handle whatever HTTP request, whether it is a get, put, delete, patch, etc. that matches this path, right? Whatever path you specify here, whatever HTTP method will be handled by this guy. So we can have our request response, and over here I want to say res.json message app.all handler. So any route that is not already defined before this line of code will be handled by this line of code. What that means is something like create user is already handled by this guy, the user's router, at line 8. And that code appears before the all route handler, and this guy too. So let's give this a try. I will head over here. I'll try to create a user. This is coming from the user's handler. But let's try an endpoint that doesn't exist, something like whatever random stuff here. You can see we get the response from the app.all handler. This is this guy here. Alright guys, this brings us to the end of this lesson. I hope it makes sense. Until next time, happy coding.